Hello, I am Elizabeth Geno, and this is my midterm project presentation for History 201, and it is on the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was implemented in an attempt to abolish slavery. It was important because the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery entirely. Those enslaved in border states had not been freed. The proclamation also did not address the issues of slavery in territories that would become states in the future. In addition to banning slavery, the amendment outlawed the practice of involuntary servitude. Involuntary servitude occurs when a person is forced to work in order to pay off debts. The 13th Amendment exempts from the involuntary servitude clause people convicted of a crime and people drafted to serve in the military. However, the 13th Amendment did not end slavery. In fact, it is the first time the word slavery was ever mentioned in the Constitution. And it is in this amendment where it is not abolished once and for all, as we were taught, but given the constitutional protection that has maintained the practice of American slavery in various forms to this very day. At the time of the founding, the concept of slavery was much broader than currently understood. Slavery meant illegitimate domination, political subordination, and the absence of republican government. Chattel slavery was only the most extreme and visible example of slavery. The broader anti-republican concept of slavery was narrowed to avoid awkward comparisons to the economic and political subordination of wage laborers and women. Once chattel slavery was abolished, labor activists and suffragists sought to revive the older, broader concept of slavery, but emancipation allowed defenders to insist that American society was now free. The 13th Amendment prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime, and provides Congress with the power to enforce this prohibition via appropriate legislation. The Supreme Court in the civil rights cases interpreted the 13th Amendment to grant Congress broad authority to eliminate the badges and incidents of slavery. It was generally understood by many prominent jurists at the time that badges and incidents of slavery referred to racially discriminatory political, civil, and legal disadvantages arising out of slavery. Justice Harlan, for example, believed that Congress should redress any race discrimination against black people under the 13th Amendment. The Constitution provides certain absolute rights that the government may not infringe upon. One of those rights is the right to be free from slavery, which the courts have expanded to include all its badges and incidents. Though courts have gone back and forth on what constitutes a badge of slavery, a look at the 13th Amendment shows that amongst the things the drafters intended the definition to include was the philosophical message of racial supremacy if it is communicated by the government. The Emancipation Proclamation freed only those slaves held in the Confederate States of America. In depriving the South of its greatest economic resource, abundant free human labor, Lincoln's proclamation was intended primarily as an instrument of military strategy. Only when emancipation was universally proposed through the 13th Amendment did it become national policy. Though 3 million Confederate slaves were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, their post-war status was uncertain. To ensure that abolition was beyond legal challenge, an amendment to the Constitution to that effect was initiated. The immediate impact of the amendment was to make the entire pre-war system of chattel slavery in the U.S. illegal. The impact of the abolition of slavery was felt quickly. When the 13th Amendment became operational, the scope of the Emancipation Proclamation was widened to include the entire nation. The amendment was passed by the Senate on April 8, 1864, but did not pass in the House until January 31, 1865. The measure was swiftly ratified by nearly all northern states, along with a sufficient number of border states. Though the amendment abolished slavery throughout the U.S., some Black Americans, particularly in the South, were subjected to other forms of involuntary labor. We still dealt with many issues of racism and segregation, even slavery, for a very long time. There are many racist acts still happening today all around us. We need to remember to look out for those around us and be a voice for those who cannot speak. If we want our children to live in a more equal world, we have to change what is happening around us today. My next slide is my works cited. My first cite is the National Geographic Society. It is where I got all of my information in the beginning about the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation, and where I talked about the definition of slavery and what the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation included. My second cite is from the Columbia Law Review, and it is one of the sites that I got off JSTOR, and that is where I talked about the concept of slavery and what slavery meant, and the definition of chattel slavery. My next site is from UCLA Law Review. I also got that off JSTOR, and that is where I got the information about the Supreme Court and civil rights cases, and the badges and incidents, and all of the information that I got about Justice Harlan, and the disadvantages in the law after abolishing slavery. My next site is from the Michigan Journal of Race and Law, and that is where I got my information about the Confederate States of America and the slaves that they freed after the Emancipation Proclamation, and how those were the only states free after the Emancipation Proclamation. It is where I got all of the information about post-war uncertainties, and the 3 million Confederate slaves, and the impact of the amendment. My last site is where I got the information about after the amendment was passed, when the 13th Amendment was passed in the Senate and the House, and what states passed the amendment swiftly, and the labor that was still around after the 13th Amendment was passed. Thank you for listening to my presentation about the 13th Amendment. I hope it was informational and educational, and thank you.